This is the new year. Happy New Year, everybody, and out there in television land. January 2nd, 2019. It's a regularly scheduled meeting of the Marquette Township Board. It's 6:30. Oops, I'm sorry. And we'd appreciate if you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, Randy, please.
Trustee Marks.
Present.
Trustee LaRue is absent and excused. Trustee Everson.
Here.
Trustee Wiegand.
Here.
Treasurer Johnson.
Here.
Clerk Rattari is here, and Supervisor Durand.
Here.
Staff present is Manager Gerard, our attorney Roger Zappa, our assessor Dulcie Ranta is here, and that's it. No committee members present tonight.
Okay. Any public comment? Anybody wish to address the board about anything? Okay, nothing, so we have no board member comment in response to that. So tonight's agenda consists of a consent agenda, which also consists of the approval of the regular and closed session minutes of December 18th and special meeting minutes of December 21st. Bills payable in the amount of $254,229.86. Received committee and other reports, including the road committee agenda for tonight that they just had. Their draft minutes of December 4th. I had no supervisor's report. And email regarding 2019 MTA conference.
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Support.
Motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And then I need approval of the rest of the agenda unless somebody has something they want to pull out. Change.
Move to approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
Motion and support. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Board education and privileged comment. We have none tonight. Community linkage. Anybody have anything to share from the community or anything we need to know about or talk about? I have one comment. My mother-in-law made a comment today. She said she's happy for the new microphones. She wanted to thank us for that because it's easier for her to hear. We also bought her a headset for her computer, so now she can really hear. And she appreciates that the clerk downloads the meeting right away so she can see it the same night because our meetings are shorter.
Well, most nights.
Most nights.
Most nights we try to get it within 24 hours anyway.
So I just wanted, she asked me to share that with you. Policy discussion, consideration and development. Tonight we're talking about considering the pilot ordinance and services agreement for Whetstone Village. And I believe, Dulcie, do you want to give us an overview first? Would that be all right? Or I wasn't sure if you were going to make a statement or, okay.
I'm only here to answer questions.
Okay.
I handed out to all of the members a synopsis of the anticipated impact to the revenues, because I know that's one of the biggest concerns when being faced with turning something from being valued as ad valorem or at current value, where we'd be doing what's called a payment in lieu of taxes based on the annual shelter rents. This is I think a good opportunity for the Whetstone portion of the buildings that are within Marquette Township to be approved, or at least have the ability to rehab those buildings. They need to be remodeled, and I think it would be a real benefit to the residents that occupy those particular structures and units. So what you have that I put in your packet is I took what I was provided by the Whetstone individuals as to what the annual rents would be, because the ordinance that we have been provided for review shows a 4% annual shelter rents. So the very first line on the sheet that I put in your bins shows that the annual shelter rents would be $304,320. Now, typical, you would subtract the cost of utilities. So to kind of put it in perspective, and I may have used a little bit of a high number, which I'm not sure if maybe you can confirm or deny how close I came, but I was trying to compare it with what Lost Creek had, because it's a similar type of ordinance, to figure out what we would be expected to adjust that shelter rent by, so we could figure out what 4% of that would generate. So I used 20% because that was pretty in line with the cost of utilities, cost of other expenses, vacancy, bad debt, to come up with what we would consider net shelter rents, was where the $243,000 came in. Then I took the 4% that would be if the board approves it and legal counsel approves it for the 4% shelter rents, would generate a payment in lieu of taxes of $9,738. Now here's where it can get a little confusing. That's for all jurisdictions within our taxing unit. So a portion of that would go to the schools, a portion of that would go to the county, the intermediate school district, Iron Ore Heritage Trail, the library. So everybody would have their certain percentage of interest based on what our percentage in millage rate would be. So again, I deferred to how Lost Creek is set up, and that's where I came up with the millages that are levied and the portion that from the state's formula the township actually gets is where the 15.116% comes from. So if I take 15.116% of 4% of their rents, that would result in the township portion being $1,472. Now, I had been asked by several board members, how would this work in relationship to how it's currently taxed? So you'll see in the next section, I had what portion of the taxes for the ad valorem portion based on their value, where you take their taxable value and you run the millage rates to show what would be generated, which could be our financial impact, how much we're looking, I don't want to say lose, but what we'd be looking at not having in our budget for the difference from ad valorem taxes versus a 4% annual rent. So if we looked at our general operating tax, currently off of our tax bill, we received $3282.21. With the payment in lieu of taxes, we'd get $728. So there would be a discrepancy or a shortfall of $2,553. Then if you look at the road fund, the difference would be $780. Law enforcement, $208. Fire equipment is $312. Those are the two new millages that we voted in, the voters, so that's new for this year. Then the Fire Act 33 is the special assessment district that is levied on all real property. That goes for their operation, so that would have a shortfall of $1,300. Now you'll notice on there I have an asterisk because we're under the impression when we were discussing things to try to make whole the one department that typically sees more calls or provides more services for the residents is typically our fire department. If there's something where our ambulances have to run or if they get called for health. So in our Lost Creek ordinance, we have the ability to do an annual inspection. And it started in 1998. It was $30 a unit. That was allowed to be inflated by the inflation rate multiplier from the state tax commission or the state treasurer that comes out every year. That's up to $46.11 to kind of put it in perspective as to how you're not stuck at a certain amount, that eventually you'll start to see at least get the inflation rate so it would stay at about the same ratio going up. So that asterisk, I was taking the $30 a unit. There's 37 units that are within Marquette Township, which would then make the fire department almost whole. Their budget would be shorted about $201. Then I have the admin fee. That's the 1% we're allowed to collect off of all of our taxes that cover my costs, treasury, tax collection, resources for printing and mailing for assessing and tax purposes. So I just wanted to kind of give you guys an idea, because when you first hear that we're going to be allowing an exemption and that it potentially would result in a lesser amount of revenues coming in, it can cause a panic or it can cause a fear to your financial officers and to you guys to be fiscally sound to your taxpayers. But I also am trying to look at the positives that would come from this as well. We have an aging building. It was built, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in 1977. And, as far as I know, and correct me again, I haven't heard of there being any updates or outside of appliances and some carpet, but that's that's not structural, that's not bringing it more up to date. So in my humble opinion, I feel that it would be something that would be real rewarding for our community to have our housing complex at the Whetstone for our buildings that would have the opportunity to have that update. When you're looking at how much it actually would impact the township, I just think it would make us good business partners to show that we're wanting to have improvements in our community, because it's not a lot of money when you're looking at what line items are impacted. And that's just my opinion, but I was asked to put together what the impact would be and where we would stand as a township if it was granted. Now, again, there's some unknowns. I was estimating, I get it, they're not going to be the same as Lost Creek. There's going to be some differences, but, you know, when we're starting to look more at the ordinance and starting to make some of the details a little more nailed down to where it can be in the ordinance, you know, we can always update these numbers so you're a lot more aware as to what your overall impact would be. Did you have any questions for me or anything?
Do you want to explain the second page a little bit too?
Oh, the second page here came directly, and I forgot your name, sir. Scott. Yeah, he is with Whetstone, and this is showing the building numbers that are actually within Marquette Township. So it's building numbers 300, 310, 320, 322, and 330 for the addresses. And he broke it down then by how many units. They have 10 units that pay the contract rent for low and very low, which is $580, which is what would generate the $69,600. So this is a summary of their rent roll for those buildings to show what type of units, how much rent they would generate, and where it would be if they were full 12 months all year round. So of course, some of these numbers may fluctuate a little bit. If you have somebody that moves out in month 10, it takes them 1 month to refurbish, get it ready, get it cleaned, repainted. So I mean, you may have 1 month that you're not going to receive 4% on, you know, because they're going to be doing all of their rent calculations based on what has taken place for that entire year.
Because it is subsidized, we hardly ever have vacants, and we get money even if they are vacant, 80%
Okay.
of. So just from a financial standpoint, we hardly have any vacancy loss. I would just think that's
Okay, that's great to know, because, you know, I was trying to give them a ballpark for worst case scenario, so
Yep, absolutely.
so that's how those numbers came into play and where I was going from there for my analysis on what financially it could impact you.
So this actually adds up to 42 units, but you're saying 37 are in the township?
Yeah, I think there is 42.
I apologize.
Okay, that's okay.
Too much holiday.
Well, and just in case the public doesn't realize that
Sure.
it's in the city as well as the township.
Correct.
The building is, you know, so we're trying to carve out our portion of it.
Correct, because only our portion is what's going to impact our overall revenues, or how either they're taxed or the ordinance gets passed and you're able to do that type of an exemption. So it strictly is, and I apologize that I made that error. It should be the higher units, but I can rerun the numbers and update you guys for Friday. So I'll make sure you guys have those.
So we have, I probably should have explained to the board that my thought was that we'd get the information tonight. We have not had a chance, I've read the contract, but we haven't really had a chance to look at it and talk about it. We're going to need, because it's an ordinance, we're going to need 2 readings. So my thought is that we would get this information tonight. If we have any preliminary questions, if you notice there's some blank lines in here that we need to fill in. So we could do our next meeting be the first reading. And then the first meeting in February could be the second reading. So we could pass it on February, whatever it is, the 2nd, I think, or 3rd is the February meeting. So that's kind of what I was thinking, like I say, so that you have time to read this and go over it. And it may even be kind of early to be asking if we have questions, because you probably haven't had a chance to study this very well.
I can clear up a couple of things. I know I've been before you about another payment in lieu of tax ordinance, and I just wanted to let you know that this particular portion of Whetstone cannot be occupied by anybody other than low or very low income, so it's not the same situation as our other ordinance.
In fact, this would be locking it in for another however many years.
And that's some of the the fill in the blanks too, is
It
the,
is.
the years and
Yeah,
the, if
typically
there are
what happens
dates.
is our attorney works with Mr. Zappa, and the attorneys kind of work out the details of the blanks. I don't get into the.
Are you gonna be able to hear him, Randy, do you
Yeah.
think?
Well, without the microphone, no,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Okay. So any thoughts or questions or comments or?
Should we move to accept the service agreement proposal?
No, I'm not recommending we do. I'm
No?
thinking that we just get the information. And then the next meeting, we can do, I mean, it's the board's choice, but that's just what I'm thinking could happen. Put it on the agenda for the next meeting and actually have it as a first reading. And that way too, if there's questions in the next 2 weeks, we can, get them to Roger or Randy or Scott or whoever, or Dulcie.
Well, I think it'd be prudent, you could move it to the legal review for the
Okay.
next meeting and have Roger work on it with the assessor and have something, come back with something next meeting for us.
Okay, does that make sense?
I do have a question for Scott, if I may.
Yeah, why don't you, just so the public can be sure to hear you.
I just had one
Loud.
question, because I was asked by the different board members. When would this project be anticipated to start for the rehabbing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, once we get the pilot approved through the township, then we have to move forward and do an appraisal, capital needs assessment, and we would probably look at submitting it to MISTA in, I think we were talking about if we could get everything lined up in July. And then they have so many days or so many, well, I say days, weeks to look at it. It probably wouldn't start until the end of 19, till the end of this year. So it's, and I know that sounds like a long way out, but it's really not, because we have to do we don't want to put a lot of money into it without knowing that we're going to get the deal pushed through. And that's part of why I'm here so early, is so I don't have to rush the board and that they can think about it and give it some thought.
Because it was just one of those things where if we were going to have this type of ordinance, we
Mhm.
would want to have like, okay, it's going to go into effect once you
Probably early 2020.
have the approval, so there'd be like one more year of ad valorem taxes
Yep.
until it would go into effect. And then if you would have an anticipated time frame for ending, because if it's not being met on certain deadlines, we just
Sure.
wanted to have different
Yep,
options, so.
so once we start, we have to get the development tax credit qualified. So it would be the end of 2020, at the extremely latest, that the construction would have to be done. And that we would have to certify every resident their income to MISTA. It's required by law that we do that. And that, those deadlines are not flexible. So the development would be tax credit qualified, is what it's called, by the end of 2020.
Okay.
So it's still better for you if we approve this in the next few months so that you
Yeah,
can
because
start by July.
this is really the first piece of the puzzle for me. And then after this, we start putting money into the development for appraisals and things. Appraisals $8,000, and then the CNA is about $8,000, and then, we have environmental things that we have to pay to have done to the development. We package all of that together and put it into a package and give it to MISTA for approval, basically.
So if we don't approve this, does that scrub the project? Or do you still go forward, or?
It has a big negative effect, because the way MISTA looks at it is the municipality's not behind the project. Yeah, so.
I had to ask,
No,
everybody needs
it's
to
a
know.
great question. Anybody else have any? I'm totally transparent. If I don't know the question, I'll try to find out. But yeah, it would, MISTA wants to see a pilot because they want the community support.
Sure.
And that's kind of their way of doing that. So,
And just so the public knows, we've thrown around a couple different terms. PILT and pilot are the same
payment in lieu of
thing.
taxes.
But
yeah.
we typically call it a PILT.
PILT.
And you came in with pilot, so I just didn't want anybody to
Oh,
be
okay.
confused.
What's
It's the same
PILT
thing.
stand for?
It's the same thing.
Oh, it's the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, just the of is taken out.
Okay.
Hills are usually with DNR parcels.
Okay.
And payment in lieu of taxes is typically when it's off of.
Oh, okay.
Like a rent or a different percentage.
Yeah.
But they're the same thing, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, she did great explaining it. I couldn't do any better than that.
Did you have any questions for me?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Yeah,
Anybody?
anything for me?
Okay.
I'm thinking it.
Oh.
Davis too.
I mean, it's,
But yeah, I'm not trying to rush anyone.
assuming that we're not gonna do anything rash tonight, it'd be nice to have time to go over this a little bit, and it'd be nice to see the documents with the blanks filled in and read through it, and it'd be nice to get it far enough ahead of time so we got time to look at it.
Roger, is this something you could have to the board like in a week, or do we need to put the first reading off a little bit? Or should we maybe have a work session or the next meeting to talk about it before we do the first reading? I don't know how complex this is for you.
I have looked at the agreement in terms of compliance with state law and so forth already, and I've got a couple of minor suggestions. I've been in touch with Warren Dean, who's the attorney for Whetstone already. I spoke with him as recently as this afternoon with one minor question. I can't come up with the numbers, especially in the secondary supplemental agreement that addresses the differential that would be paid that was discussed briefly at the last meeting. I have to have somebody supply those to me. So to some extent, filling in the blanks isn't my job. I just fill it in with whatever somebody tells me that number's going to be. I don't create those numbers. My review of it is strictly from the legalities and does it meet constitutional issues that could potentially come about if the wording is incorrect, especially when you will have two PILT or pilot ordinances. There are certain considerations that we have to just take a look at. I am not seeing any major issues in that regard. So my job can be done pretty quickly. It's going to be hung up a little bit on just wherever those numbers are coming from, especially to fill in the blanks that we've talked about.
So what are you thinking, Scott, if
Well,
time-wise?
I'm thinking that basically, and I understand, yeah, you've talked to Warren, and it's the pilot in itself, the ordinance and the service agreement's a boilerplate thing through MISTA, so Warren didn't even come up with that. It was so I'm sure it's good. But as far as the numbers go, if I can work with Dulcie on those, and then I can get Warren maybe on the phone, and the three of us can do a phone conference, and then if you're fine with the neutral payment or whatever we come up with, and then we present it to you. And
I guess my biggest thing too is, a little direction from the board. Are you wanting to be made whole, or are you wanting to realize that you may not have your full revenue of ad valorem? I was just giving you, this is absolute worst case scenario, to kind of get an idea as to where you're going. Are you, did you want that, and, if it was an annual inspection for the units, did you want it to be $35 a unit? I mean, just some direction. I was just using the bare minimums, just to give you an idea. This is worst case scenario, in my opinion.
yeah,
Well, so if we have better numbers from Scott, I think first, that would at least give us
Vacancies and stuff.
someplace to
Yeah.
start.
yeah,
We can do that, yeah.
that was an actual number, the numbers I provided.
Oh, yeah, I way overestimated the loss. He's showing me here it's 4168.
I mean, that's actual.
And I put in 60,000, so that really changes the amount of the shelter
That's why
rents.
I'm saying, and we calculated this out. I mean, this is factual stuff. So that our rents would be $304,320 minus vacancy loss, which was $4,169. It gives you the difference of $300,000 basically, and then utilities come up to about $49,000 for the utility costs. And those utilities are going to go down after we rehab it, because we're we're required to do green. So my numbers are actually conservative too. 251,348 times 4% would give you about 10,000, which you're not far off.
but-
Yeah, we're about $400 off. So
Close.
yeah,
But the
very
big thing
close.
is the utilities, like you said.
Yeah, and the utility, if you do a 4%, you're gonna actually make more than my projection here. I mean, you just will, but it is what it is. If I don't have to pay as much utilities, you get more money. I mean, it's a yin and a yang for me. I don't
So
really.
why don't we just see what you can come up with
Okay.
without having to, I didn't know how time sensitive this was.
Yeah.
If you were looking for something by March 1st, and we were kind of
Yeah,
trying to
probably
put it
March
together.
1st would be good if I could get something.
So if you can give us some real numbers, give us some time, if you
Okay.
can put it together by the, before the next meeting, so we have a few days
Mm-hmm.
to look at it. If it's timely enough, we can put it on the agenda.
Okay.
If not, first February meeting. Does that make sense? So we have time to think about it. Ernie?
I think we should also address what the annual inspection fee is going to be too. Make
Sure.
sure we get that nailed down at this point in time too, because that's going to have to be figured in there at some blank somewhere down the line. I think one of the items Dulcie brought up about time frame for the rehab being started and finished, that should be in there too at some point in time, so if it's not completed, this is all null
Well,
and
if it's
void.
not completed, I'm in more trouble than with you guys, but a lot more trouble.
But I think we need to put it down for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I would certainly give you a timeline.
So if we could get this compiled,
Okay,
just if it can happen before the next meeting,
which is,
the.
15th.
Yeah, it's 15th. The
okay.
packet says the 22nd, but it's actually the
okay.
15th,
So we would need to have your information by the 10th.
10th. Okay,
for us to look at.
Next
And
week.
then,
I can get
if
that.
we decide, if we have the time and the information, we want to do the first reading or wait till the first meeting in February.
Okay. That's fair.
We actually have, January's a 5-week month, I think, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Is
So
it-
we have 3 weeks between the second meeting in January and the first meeting in February. So that would give us even more time to look at it.
Okay,
So, just, Dulcie can let us know if it's ready to put on the agenda, if it's ready to be considered a first reading.
yeah.
Depending
I'll
on-
work on it tomorrow.
Okay.
Well, I'll make a motion, we move this item to the agenda for the second meeting in January.
Second meeting in January.
I'll have it.
Okay, the 15th.
I'll have it way before, I'll have it probably by the end of this week or beginning of
So you
next.
anticipate that to be a first reading?
Hmm,
I'm thinking that's pretty quick, but,
probably target the first reading for the first meeting in February, and then second meet in February would be the second reading.
Is that changeable based on what we get any information and what the opinion of the board is when we read through it?
we can change it at the first reading, can't we, Roger? If we have things that we find or don't like or ask or.
Sure, then you'll
That's-
just need
that's
another
part of
first
it.
reading,
Right.
because you have to
Yes.
publish as introduced.
So the 5th of March is the first meeting in March.
The 5th of March.
Right.
Okay.
No, I guess the question I was asking is, if it's on the agenda for the 15th, and nobody has any questions because all the answers,
It has to be listed as a first reading, we just can't say it's a first reading at the meeting, it has to be listed, right, Roger?
Push it to February anyway.
They can declare it first
That's why I'm saying, depending on what information.
Can we do that?
We're ready.
I was having multiple conversations here. You don't have to declare it, you just have to introduce it. And if it's satisfactory, that can be your first reading. Your second reading is much more stringent on the things you have to do, you have to publish and post and so forth, because it's an ordinance. So if you're going to make changes at your, let's say it looks satisfactory on January 15th's meeting, that can then be your first reading if all the ducks are in a row, the Ts are crossed and the Is are dotted, or you can defer it to your first meeting in February, and then that can be your first reading because you had more questions or needed to ponder it some more.
Well, why don't we just list it as a first reading then, because that doesn't mean anything really, other than just introducing it,
If
so.
you need to do that, all you need to do is have it on the agenda and then.
For consideration.
And then deal with it as a first reading.
Yeah,
And then
consider
would
it
that
as
be
a,
part of the motion, we'd say, we'd approve this as a first reading.
Correct.
And then that's documented that way.
Yes.
Yes.
so,
Then you have to
That
go
makes
through,
sense?
then you go through the publishing process for
Right.
the second
For the
reading.
second one.
so my motion will be to send it to the next meeting as a first reading, a consideration for a first reading.
Okay, we put consideration.
Are we clear? As mud?
You're gonna second
I
or
just
do you
want
have a
to know when to
question
be here.
I have a question at that point.
first?
Oh,
Okay.
she did say
Our
March.
inspection fee,
February.
we have to come up with something from the board level
Mhm.
where we're gonna go. at this point in time.
Yeah, we don't have to do it now, unless you want to.
Well,
Tell them
if
to
you're gonna
put
fill in the
something in.
blanks for the next meeting to have it pretty well set, you may wanna do it now.
Well, that is one of the questions that'll be discussed, and, you know, when it comes back to you, there'll be a recommendation for a fee for the inspection.
I guess my question is, do you want the fire department made whole? If you want the fire department made whole, I can figure out what that rate would be.
Yeah.
Because quite honestly, that's the one fund that is going to have the most expense that potentially could be impacted. It's going to be on, you know, ambulance calls or any fire department 911 calls. So that's why I was saying, if you wanted to make any funds whole, that would be the one, and that's the avenue you have, is through the inspection fees to mirror what we do at Lost Creek.
Right, and since that is a special assessment funded department, I would certainly recommend that you keep it whole.
Because they're more limited, the funds are so.
They have no other source of revenue.
So that's where that $30 came in, and if it's inflation rate, you're gonna be keeping it in line with what the state's recognizing as your inflation rate. So when I said $30, had I been using the right number of units,
Yeah.
if I had been using 42, they would be almost exactly a wash.
So,
Because 5 units at $30, I
So
mean,
she
it's
was
real
right.
close. It's real close, yeah.
without knowing
Yes.
it.
Accidentally right.
Well, in addition to having the right numbers in there, this is also your recommendation too. So, I mean, this is what you initially were recommending. So if your numbers were gonna change, that's what you'd recommend.
Right.
So we do
Sure.
that.
Yeah.
So it makes sense.
Yeah, the number's the number.
So were you seconding too, Ernie, did you say, or? John is, okay.
Supporting that it'll go to the next meeting for consideration of the first reading.
Okay. Any other questions? We'll have some time to study this. Okay?
And if you have
Well-
questions, don't hesitate to email me or to come into my office. I'll try to answer anything I can, and if I can't get the, you know, right answer, I'll work
Yeah.
with Scott and we'll
She's
figure
got
out
my
the
email,
numbers.
phone number.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Once more?
So my understanding, we're moving forward with what information we have concerning these units and that, as far as the low income and that, at this point in time, that too, so. And then, but really no change with the philosophy that we've had in the past, other than whatever dollar amounts come up.
I see what you're saying. Yep, does that make sense, his question?
Consistent treatment.
Well, my comment would be too, is I agree with the assessor. I think it's a good project for that area to rehab that area. The buildings are 35-plus years old, and it could be a great service to that area for that.
Okay? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. We will consider it as a first reading for the January 15th meeting. Thank you. Thanks, Dulce.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So that'll be January 15th. Okay. We're just flying along here. Current committee members and expiration dates. If you checked your mailboxes, you'll see I did stick, well, actually, Andrews put it in once she looked it over. And we can, how can we get this in the packet afterward, Randy, so the public can see it
What I was thinking,
If Andrea has it, she'll probably already uploaded it
on the website?
on the online packet.
Oh, in the packet too, okay.
well, I was thinking, just to make it clear, I would put this document right in the minutes under the board, and then we would have this as a record going forward, so you could reference it.
So if there are any little tweaky things that Roger needs to look at, because he hasn't seen this final one yet either. We talked before about whether they, you know, it was an odd or an even year, and if it had to be a staggered term and everything like that. This, I believe this is pretty good based on what he's told me and what the bylaws say. But I'll have him check it over too, so, just in case it changes. And then the ZBA is going to have a meeting, they're going to try to schedule it for January 31st. And the the officers will be chosen then. So I just left it at the bottom so we wouldn't forget to identify those, because they are required in the bylaws.
So I'll make a motion to accept the memo from the supervisor with the current committee members and expiration dates.
You
I'm just accepting the memo, that's all.
want to update this with the chairs and vice chairs and all that before you finalize it? You said that was required by the bylaws.
It is that they change, it doesn't say every year, and that was one of my questions too. And Isaac said that typically the ZBA does change their officers every year. It doesn't say in the bylaws that it's required, it just says they have to have them.
I mean, there's
So
none,
they will do
there's
that.
none in the road committee, for example.
No, I'm just talking about the ZBA.
Okay.
That's the requirement part I was talking about. Yeah, if you can tell me who's who.
Actually, nothing changed there from last year. We just did it tonight, and I'm still the chair.
Okay.
And Pete's the vice chair, and Mike Springer's the secretary.
How about recreation? Is anything different?
Recreation, we didn't deal with that until the end of this month.
Okay, that's fine.
And the planning commission, I'm the board rep and the secretary.
But you haven't met yet for this year. That should be
That's true.
on your next agenda.
Yep.
So we can hold that.
But as far as for the clerk is concerned, I just want to know who's on the committee. It's not really up to I don't really care who's the vice chair.
Yeah.
I just want to know who's on the committee, so when we, at the end of this year, in the succeeding years, we know what positions are up.
And you can see, I did print mine in color, but the two blank screen sections are what we are missing.
Support.
And actually, this can come back to us in February with the updated.
Yeah, we're not locked in stone
No.
in this, because if somebody leaves and we have to change it, it's okay. We just wanted to make sure we had an established one to start with, and then we can update it as we go
We're
along.
accepting the memo as is right now, so then we can get an updated one as time goes.
Right.
See it
Dave
again.
seconded. So any other questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. So I'll just, for committee appointments, I'll just reiterate for the public that if anybody's interested in helping on the events committee, and Randy will tell you, we've got a couple that are going to try this month. There are, half a dozen, probably at the most right now, events that the township tries to put on, 3 main ones. And they appreciate help. We've got 3 members plus the manager, and it's a lot of work to do the Santa arrival and the car show and the community days. So, maybe there's somebody out there that would really like to help on that. And the road committee is the other. We don't have to have another member, but it's always nice to have one. It says in the bylaws that there are 5 members, and it's a board committee, so those are our bylaws. It's not like a legal thing where the state gets involved. So anybody's interested in those 2 committees, feel free. Otherwise, any public comment? We have 1 public left. No? Okay. Meeting wrap-up. Any announcements anybody wants to share? Yes, Randy?
There's no election scheduled for 2019 as of now, but last time that happened, we had 3, so I really don't want to say anything too much about that, but I was thinking over the holidays and towards the end of the year, I'm going to investigate looking for some software that maybe can streamline the minutes part of the meeting, because I think I'm doing it archaic by just typing in and Word, Microsoft Word, and just doing that. There has to be a better way of streamlining it, in my opinion, than the way I'm doing it now. So, and I think that would solve 2 things. It would save time for me, and what the board would like, it more of a compilation of minutes and motions, maybe that would help do that. the same, it'll kind of kill two birds with one stone. And I'm going to take some time this year and investigate what other municipalities do and other townships. I think we're way ahead of the curve than a lot of townships with what we do, but I know some of the cities are using a different software for their packets and their minutes, and I think it could be more efficient than we're doing it now. So I'm going to investigate that hopefully in this year and see hopefully what I can come up with.
Are you still interested in doing your other software package? That's a little more expensive probably, but.
Yeah, well, I just want to take a look at a lot of things, and that other software I talked about tying the minutes with video, which is another good thing to do. But I'm going to just take some time, maybe the first 4 months of this year, and look and see what other places do, and hopefully come up with a report mid-year, and maybe then try to make that change next year and incorporate it into our budget if it's not a big expense.
Okay. Sounds good.
I think trying to move forward, and try to get us more into the 21st century of things. Because when we've been doing it the same way the last 10 years, so I think there's got to be a better way of doing it, so.
Yeah, you should be able to read it in, or have the tape recorder read it in and then have it on Word. At least you wouldn't have to retype everything.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the new software has it too, where you would have your agenda, and the staff can actually put the attachments right into it from their computer. And it's available online or on tablets, and you can pull it up right at the meeting, and it syncs right with the video, and I think it would just be a lot more efficient for us. And that's what I'm looking for, is efficiency, so.
Streamlining. We do that all the time at work. Okay, any other announcements? Manager's report.
You do have a printed report in front of you, so we'll walk through that real briefly. We wrapped up 2018 without a resolution of the BLP issues. We have not had any formal communication from the board of the BLP or the operations of the BLP with regard to the vibration and noise issues, although there have been numerous articles in the Mining Journal and items. We've not received any direct communication since the last that you received. So that's still an ongoing issue. The Lions Field and the Community Events Committee were busily trying to work on some winter programs. We are having a little difficulty since we haven't had winter yet. As you're probably aware, the ice rink is not currently flooded. We still have very unseasonable weather forecast through the rest of this week and into next week. We won't be starting to work on that until we have some consistent freezing temperatures. It's just fruitless to try and do it. I don't know if you saw or not, the ski area basically is struggling as well. They're having some issues with the weather. They are open, very limited runs. So, it's not just us. Most folks are having some difficulty with outdoor recreational activities. We are, however, planning again to have the NMU Wildcats on our ice January 20th for an inter-squad game, similar to what we did last year. So that's in the works right now. We're pretty confident by the 20th we'll have some ice. I hope. We'll see where that goes. We do have the grant submitted for the expanded fencing to try and keep pucks and other projectiles on the ice as opposed to in the neighboring properties. And a couple of other items that have come up. I don't know if board members saw in the December 28th issue of the Mining Journal the article about the Road Commission receiving federal funding, basically to reconfigure in some manner, we don't know what as yet, the intersection of Commerce Drive and Wright Street, which has been problematic for us in the past. As you'll recall, we were competitors for a $100,000 grant that the Road Commission was successful in attaining, and that's basically where that $100,000 is going, is as a match for that Category F funding. I believe, if I recall correctly, it's about $375,000 they're going to get to rehab that intersection and possibly use some resurfacing on 492. So that's coming up. The MTA had published, and I think you also saw from Fahey Schultz, a rundown of some of the lame duck actions. The state continues to try and reduce our revenue streams with regard to energy and energy producing, as well as fiber network. They're talking about exempting them from property taxes. So those are all issues that will impact us from a financial standpoint going forward. Also, passed, as the minimum wage is going to be increasing, not as much as what was proposed, but it is going to be increasing coming up. That won't affect us directly, but will affect many of the businesses in our community. So that may have an impact on participation in other events. The last question that I have is, with the passage of the 2019 budget, I do have in the budget funds to replace your laptops, but I do need to know what it is that you wish to do. Do you wish to go to tablets, similar to what Clerk Rotari or Supervisor Durant has, or do you want to look at replacing with laptops again? We're coming up on the point where these laptops are almost 7 years old. Several of them have had hard drive crashes. The keyboards are starting to get sticky. They're basically usually about 5 years is the lifespan for these types of equipment. So we're at almost 7 years now. So, question that I need to know from you folks is, what is it that you want to do with your electronics? Do you want to stay with laptops? Do you want to switch to a smaller format tablet? What is it that you would like to do? I have prices both ways, so I just need to know what it is that you'd like to do.
Widescreen.
Widescreen? Bigger. Okay, some
Can't
want to
bring
go
it to
smaller. I guess what I'll do then is I will send an email out to all of the board members asking you what it is that you individually want to do, and then I'll get pricing from that standpoint. Whether you want the same size as what we currently have, bigger screens, or smaller tablets. And then we can get that squared away and get those ordered for you.
Okay.
All right, I'll send an email out tomorrow, and then you can just respond back what it is you'd like to see. Okay, that's all that I had.
Randy, do we have a deadline or anything on the grant on the ice rink?
Yeah, it was November 30th was the application deadline, and they said that they would be through their process within 90 days. So we're
Okay.
probably talking close to spring.
By the time we'd hear about it, okay.
Yes. Yeah, well, that would be the actual award. They'll have made their decision and made the award within 90 days.
Okay,
Awards could be plural.
okay. It's a little different than dealing with the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is Parplan. This is our insurance company. They carry our workers' compensation and liability coverage, and this is their risk reduction plan. So if you have a project that reduces your risk, you're eligible to apply for a grant to assist in accomplishing that, which minimizes their liability. It's a good program.
Any other questions for the manager? Easy crowd tonight. Any board member comment? Oh, sorry, I missed review. Review of motions.
Okay, first motion was to approve the consent agenda. Second motion was approval of the regular agenda as presented. The third motion was to consider the pilot ordinance and service agreement for Whetstone, to consider it as the ordinance as a first reading at the next meeting. That was the third motion. The fourth motion was to accept the committee appointment, or the committee, or the memo for the committees list. And that's it.
Okay, so all I have for future agenda is the Whetstone consideration at this point. Yes, Dave?
I would again like to see if that can get on there about, we talked about it on December 4th, about directing the manager for some definitions and costs for contingency funds and emergency reserves and operational reserves, so that we can get that out of the way.
Yep.
I'd like to see that get back on the agenda the next time, and really that first agenda item is only going to be to have a motion to direct the manager to do so, because that's what it says in our policy governance.
Yep, he's already actually started working on it.
Well, I realize that. I just like to keep it all in
Yeah,
the
formalize it.
formalized.
Yep, absolutely. And then I had sent you that email. I've got a list of things for us to talk about too. I'll get that to you in the next day or so. so you can look at it, just so we know we're on the same page. And it's, most of it is things that you've talked about over the year that I wrote down, and a couple things that I'm recommending we discuss too. So we can structure that however you want. Take one at a time, or put it all in a work session, or whatever you think you want to do. So I'll get that to you this week too, that you can think about it. So besides Whetstone, we'll have my recommendations for 2019 and 20, and what Dave was talking about too.
And I guess to expand on that a little bit, where I would like to see that all end up going is first establish those dollar amounts and the definitions, and once that's established, you can take a look at the fund balances. And it disturbs me that there's been some comments about we really can't spend that because it was earmarked for other things, but those other things were not approved. So we should,
Just the utility side you're thinking about,
looking at the fund balances in general,
for all of them? Okay.
and decide what you want to do with those. Because it seems silly to just leave them languishing, collecting their 1% interest when we,
Where are you getting one?
well, I'm being generous.
0.01.
When I think we have a greater responsibility of the residents out there to make sure that those dollars are being used for something. The first thing that comes to mind is some of the asset management replacement programs for infrastructure. There's some more than reasonable funding in there on the sanitary sewer side. That would be enough to, but then again, we need to see the asset management program, which we haven't seen yet. So there's a number of issues there that we need to address, and I'd like to, once we move through the definitions and assign the dollar amounts for each one of those categories, I would like to take a look at asset management programs, where they're at, and see if we can't move the fund balances to more productive use. And I had already asked the manager once about, I don't know if you got an answer back, about.
But you do the transfer from
Yeah.
enterprise to general fund?
No, enterprise to enterprise.
I think within enterprise funds you can, you can't with the general fund to the enterprise. They're totally separate. But
And I will-
we have a history of doing transfers.
I will touch on that when I get to additional comments.
Oh, well, you can keep going. It's all right.
Well, what it seems to me would be a good idea for the board to consider is we have, I guess we'll call it a tidy sum in the sanitary sewer of fund balances. And when you look over at the water fund, we're paying 4.5% interest on a couple loans. It seems to me a prudent use of that money on the front, and nobody's going to lose a thing on it, is the money that's sitting in the fund balance for the sewer is earning 0.5% interest. And the water department is paying 4.75% interest on the loan they've got out there. It seems silly that you can't take money from that, pay off those loans. The water department can pay back the sanitary sewer department at some outlandish rate like 2.5% or something, and everybody saves money, and the sanitary sewer actually makes money, and they get their money back. It just seems we should be doing a little more with that money than just letting us sit there gain its 0.5%. Well, we're on the other side of the scale, we're paying almost 5%.
Actually, that's one of the items, one of the dozen or so that I'm going to bring you, but not necessarily with that account, but just the idea of using some of the money that we do have set aside to pay some of these loans. And we
Well,
talked
and I had
about that
asked,
a little bit.
I had asked the manager if there was any problem with an enterprise fund loaning another enterprise fund money. I realize there's an issue with an enterprise fund loaning a general fund money.
Right.
But it seems enterprise to enterprise, we should be able to relieve some of that. And the nice thing about it is if you can pay off the DWRF and the water, if you can pay that off earlier, and you can start putting some money away because we're gonna come up with a big bill here for what we should be putting away for operational reserves and emergency reserves and asset management replacement costs. We have to start planning for that sooner or later. And this would be as good a time as any.
The only other piece that we need to take a look at between the water and the sewer is, were there restrictions from the funding entities? Because there are different state departments and maybe some restrictions in there. typically what they say is that the operation of the system has to be funded for replacement improvement and continued operation from the users. And there may be some language in those agreements, which I have not seen yet. I've asked Kirk to provide me copies of those contracts that may be restrictive in terms of crossing lines, but we'll find that out.
So my suggestion is to start with the definitions first and just keep going from there.
So we know what we're
Right.
trying to do, yeah.
Yep.
Contingency and all that. Ernie, go ahead.
But if you're just borrowing between units,
Right.
it shouldn't make any difference in that, because rather than paying the bank, you're paying another.
That's what my
another
logic
unit.
says, but that would be for
Internally.
greater minds than I to
It's all
figure out.
internal.
Well, it's internal, but both water and wastewater are under separate contracts to the state, and there may be restrictive language in those contracts that they can't go back and forth. That's what we need to track down. But from the standpoint of the solid waste fund, that's ours. That's our fund, so wherever that goes is where it goes. But there may be restrictive language between the SRF and the DWRF programs in terms of how the funds generated can be applied.
And once we get past the definition section and we assign dollar amounts for the emergency reserves and operational reserves and all that, then we can take a look at what's left
Right.
in that fund, and I'm sure it's going to be a sizable amount. And that's just a matter of the board directing the manager to find those answers out. And again, it's just a motion to direct the manager.
Right,
Same as-
and then the action is simply an action of the board to transfer funds. Budget amendment.
I don't hear Roger jumping up and down over there, so at least we're saying things that he doesn't object to, right? Because I'm thinking you would interrupt if something was going awry. I would hope so.
Yeah, it would just,
Not
I
make
guess,
it
where I'm
languish.
trying to get to this year is I would just like to see us clean up some of the,
Bad habits.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah, more so observation than.
Well,
bad-
be more
bad
accountable
habits.
and
It's,
use the residents' money in a more,
Efficient. We're
Efficient
doing the
manner.
efficient thing this year.
yeah.
Well, it's like anything else, why do you have a big bank account if you're paying bills? I mean, that's basically the
Yep.
question. You've got, and it's not new, it's not a new question. It's every time in a budget we deal with a potential rate increase, well, how can you raise rates because you got this kind of money sitting in a reserve fund?
And
And if you have a valid answer for it, that's
by
one
the
thing.
time we get to budget season next year, I would like to have that
Oh, yeah.
all resolved, so we know where all that money is earmarked for,
Exactly.
and we have a better answer.
And we are, as Supervisor Durant mentioned in the email that I sent out, we are working on those based on discussion in the last budget session. Those are items that we're addressing.
Okay. That was kind of the future items discussed, agenda discussion, but any board member comment?
Just had one question for Randy. Did the superintendent of public works give you an indication of when he was going to retire?
Not
Nothing?
anything other than possibility.
How long do you anticipate it would take when he does retire then to find a replacement?
That's some of
Yeah,
my
at least 6
discussion
months.
that I want to have.
Yeah, it's at least 6 months by the time you get into advertising and everything else. It's unlikely that we'll have somebody internally that meets the criteria.
Okay.
Anything else? Yes, sir, one more?
Isn't that an issue that we're taking up at the start of this year,
Yeah,
the replacement program?
yeah, it's on the list.
We have yet to get back into that, right?
No,
Correct.
it's on my list. I think there's a dozen things that we need to talk about, or get rid of, one or the other. They've come up and we haven't finished talking about them. So you can tell me what you want to do. Anything else? I'll get you the list in the next day or two, so you have time to think about it, or add to it.
Yeah, we actually have, several staff members that are long served that could at any point in time decide that they want to retire. 3, 4 of them.
Okay. Just need another motion unless somebody has something else.
Make a motion, we adjourn?
Support.
Oh, jeez.
Don't all jump at once. You want to hang around
They
for
were
a
all
while?
thinking about that.
We're beating the 63 minutes. I'm excited.
Well, I was kind of holding back because I wanted to vote no, but
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Thank you. 6:30, or 7:30.